July 1944, Central Germany. The factory floor shakes as another prototype engine screams to life. Sparks scatter. Engineers lean closer. Clipboards tighten in their hands. Somewhere beyond the walls, Allied bombers cross the horizon, but inside, attention is fixed on the future. Germany is chasing a breakthrough. Jet fighters, rocket planes, wonder weapons promise to reverse the war with speed and shock. Each new design arrives with urgency, with hope, with the belief that one decisive leap can undo years of pressure. Across the Atlantic, there is no single moment like this. In American factories, nothing screams. Machines hum. Assembly lines move at a steady pace. Identical aircraft roll forward. Identical parts fit without argument. Crews are trained, replaced, trained again. Systems repeat. Systems endure. Two nations are building power in very different ways. One believes the next innovation will save them. The other believes reliability will outlast innovation. By 1944, the difference is no longer philosophical, it is immeasurable. In sorties flown, in tanks repaired, in pilots replaced faster than they are lost. Germany is reaching for miracles. America is constructing momentum. And as the war accelerates, only one of those approaches will survive the weight of reality. The contrast between Germany and the United States in the Second World War did not begin with tanks on borders or bombers in the sky. It began years earlier in how each nation imagined what modern war would require and how it prepared to meet that requirement. Germany entered the 1930s with urgency baked into its strategy. The memory of the First World War and the constraints of the Treaty of Versailles shaped every decision. Rearmament, once it began in earnest, was driven by the belief that speed would compensate for weakness. Germany could not afford a long war. Its economy, access to raw materials, and industrial depth were limited. Victory, therefore, had to come quickly. This belief shaped German military thinking from the start. The Wehrmacht focused on decisive campaigns. Blitzkrieg was not just a tactic, it was a necessity. Breakthroughs at the front, rapid encirclements, and psychological shock were meant to end wars before Germany's structural disadvantages could assert themselves. Technology followed this logic. New weapons were valued for their ability to create sudden advantage rather than sustained output. In the early years, this approach worked. German forces combined radios, fast-moving armor, and coordinated air support into a system that overwhelmed opponents unprepared for its speed. Poland fell in weeks, France collapsed in months. These victories reinforced a dangerous lesson that innovation and boldness could substitute for depth. The lesson did not age well. Across the Atlantic, the United States approached war from a fundamentally different position. Geography insulated it, resources surrounded it, time was its ally. American planners did not assume a short conflict, they assumed friction, distance, and attrition. Their challenge was not how to win quickly, but how to fight continuously. This assumption shaped everything. Before entering the war, the United States invested heavily in industrial coordination. Factories were designed for standardization. Interchangeable parts were not a slogan, they were doctrine. Training programs emphasized replacement as much as excellence. Logistics was treated not as a support function, but as a weapon. America did not plan for miracles, it planned for averages. This distinction mattered profoundly once war expanded beyond initial expectations. Germany's early successes masked underlying fragility. As campaigns lengthened, equipment wore down, vehicles required maintenance, ammunition and fuel had to move across widening fronts. Skilled crews were lost and could not be replaced at the same pace. The German system, optimized for momentum, struggled to sustain it. When faced with this strain, Germany did not slow down, it doubled down. New designs were introduced to compensate for emerging weaknesses. Heavier tanks promised battlefield dominance. Advanced aircraft promised to reclaim air superiority. Each innovation was impressive in isolation. Each demanded more resources, more specialized maintenance, more time. The war Germany was fighting no longer matched the war it had planned for. Meanwhile, American power was just beginning to mobilize. The United States did not enter the conflict with the most advanced weapons. Early American tanks were mechanically reliable but tactically unimpressive. Early aircraft were not revolutionary. What they shared was something less visible but far more important. They could be built, repaired, and replaced in enormous numbers. American planners accepted that equipment would be lost. They designed systems to absorb that loss. Training pipelines were expanded to produce pilots, mechanics, and officers continuously. Units were rotated, refitted, and reinforced. A destroyed tank did not end in operation. A lost aircraft did not cripple a squadron. The system compensated. This approach lacked drama. There were no wonder weapons to announce, no single breakthrough to celebrate. Instead, there was repetition, output, consistency, a belief that war would be decided not by peaks of brilliance, but by sustained pressure applied over time. By 1942, these philosophies began to collide. Germany found itself engaged on multiple fronts, facing opponents who refused to collapse quickly. The Soviet Union absorbed staggering losses and continued fighting. Britain remained in the war. The United States entered with industrial force unmatched by any nation in history. The German response was predictable and fatal. Rather than simplify and standardize, Germany fragmented. Multiple tank designs competed for limited resources. Aircraft programs multiplied. Production runs shortened. Maintenance became specialized. Spare parts became scarce. The system grew more complex just as it needed to become more resilient.
America moved in the opposite direction. It simplified designs to speed production. It standardized components across models. It accepted good enough if it meant reliable output. Innovation was not abandoned, but it was controlled, phased, and integrated only when it could scale. This was not a moral difference, it was a structural one. Germany sought advantage through breakthroughs because it needed them. America built systems because it could afford to. The tragedy for Germany was that once the war became long, the logic that had brought early victory became a liability. By the middle of the war, Germany was no longer choosing between innovation and standardization. It was trapped by its early success. The belief that one more leap for restore balance became habit. Each new weapon promised salvation just beyond reach. America, by contrast, did not look for salvation. It built inevitability. By 1943, the outcome was not yet decided, but the direction was. One side was increasingly dependent on extraordinary solutions. The other was compounding ordinary ones. And as the war accelerates, only one of those approaches will survive the weight of reality. The contrast between Germany and the United States in the Second World War did not begin with tanks on borders or bombers in the sky. It began years earlier, and how each nation imagined what modern war would require, and how it prepared to meet that requirement. Germany entered the 1930s with urgency baked into its strategy. The memory of the First World War and the constraints of the Treaty of Versailles shaped every decision. Rearmament, once it began in earnest, was driven by the belief that speed would compensate for weakness. Germany could not afford a long war. Its economy, access to raw materials, and industrial depth were limited. Victory therefore had to come quickly. This belief shaped German military thinking from the start. The Wehrmacht focused on decisive campaigns. Blitzkrieg was not just a tactic, it was a necessity. Breakthroughs at the front, rapid encirclements, and psychological shock were made to end wars before Germany's structural disadvantages could assert themselves. Technology followed this logic. New weapons were valued for their ability to create sudden advantage, rather than sustained output. In the early years, this approach worked. German forces combined radios, fast-moving armor, and coordinated air support into a system that overwhelmed opponents unprepared for its speed. Poland fell in weeks, France collapsed in months. These victories reinforced a dangerous lesson, that innovation and boldness could substitute for depth. The lesson did not age well. Across the Atlantic, the United States approached war from a fundamentally different position. Geography insulated it, resources surrounded it, time was its ally. American planners did not assume a short conflict, they assumed friction, distance, and attrition. Their challenge was not how to win quickly, but how to fight continuously. This assumption shaped everything. Before entering the war, the United States invested heavily in industrial coordination. Factories were designed for standardization. Interchangeable parts were not a slogan, they were doctrine. Training programs emphasized replacement as much as excellence. Logistics was treated not as a support function, but as a weapon. America did not plan for miracles, it planned for averages. This distinction mattered profoundly once war expanded beyond initial expectations. Germany's early successes masked underlying fragility. As campaigns lengthened, equipment were down. Vehicles required maintenance. Ammunition and fuel had to move across widening fronts. Skilled crews were lost and could not be replaced at the same pace. The German system, optimized for momentum, struggled to sustain it. When faced with this strain, Germany did not slow down, it doubled down. New designs were introduced to compensate for emerging weaknesses. Heavier tanks promised battlefield dominance. Advanced aircraft promised promiscuous air tyranny. Each innovation was impressive in isolation. Each demanded more resources, more specialized maintenance, more time. The war Germany was fighting no longer matched the war it had planned for. Meanwhile, American power was just beginning to mobilize. The United States did not enter the conflict with the most advanced weapons. Early American tanks were mechanically reliable but tactically unimpressive. Early aircraft were not revolutionary. What they shared was something less visible but far more important. They could be built, repaired, and replaced in enormous numbers. American planners accepted that equipment would be lost. They designed systems to absorb that loss. Training pipelines were expanded to produce pilots, mechanics, and officers continuously. Units were rotated, refitted, and reinforced. A destroyed tank did not end an operation. A lost aircraft did not cripple a squadron. The system compensated. This approach lacked trauma. There were no wonder weapons to announce, no single breakthrough to celebrate. Instead, there was repetition, output, consistency. A belief that war would be decided not by peaks of brilliance, but by sustained pressure applied over time. By 1942, these philosophies began to collide. Germany found itself engaged on multiple fronts, facing opponents who refused to collapse quickly. The Soviet Union absorbed staggering losses and continued fighting. Britain remained in the war. The United States entered with industrial force unmatched by any nation in history. The German response was predictable and fatal. Rather than simplify and standardize, Germany fragmented. Multiple tank designs competed for limited resources. Aircraft programs multiplied. Production runs shortened. Maintenance became specialized. Spare parts became scarce. The system grew more complex just as it needed to voice on it. America moved in the opposite direction. It simplified designs to speed production. It standardized components across models. It accepted good enough if it meant reliable output. Innovation was not abandoned, but it was controlled, phased, and integrated only when it could scale. This was not a moral difference, it was a structural one. Germany sought advantage through breakthroughs because it needed them. America built systems because it could afford to. The tragedy for Germany was that once the war became long, the logic that had brought early victory became a liability. By the middle of the war, Germany was no longer choosing between innovation and standardization. It was trapped by its earlier success. The belief that one more leap could restore balance became habit. Each new weapon promised salvation just beyond reach. America, by contrast, did not look for salvation. It built inevitability. By 1943, the outcome was not yet decided, but the direction was. One side was increasingly dependent on extraordinary solutions. The other was compounding ordinary ones. And as the war moved towards its most intense phase, the difference between chasing breakthroughs and building systems would no longer be theoretical. It would decide who could keep fighting and who would eventually run out of ways to pretend that the next idea would change everything. By 1943, the war had expanded beyond anything Germany had planned for. What had begun as a series of fast, decisive campaigns had transformed into a global struggle of distance, attrition, and time. The fronts were wider, the enemies were stronger, and the margin for error was disappearing. This is where the structural difference between Germany and the United States became impossible to hide. Germany's economy was now under constant strain. Strategic bombing disrupted production. Raw materials grew scarce. Skilled labor was quartered to the army or killed at the front. Factories were forced to relocate, disperse, and rebuild under pressure. Under these conditions, complexity became a threat. Yet complexity was exactly what Germany produced. Tank production illustrates the problem clearly. Instead of converging on a small number of standardized designs, Germany fielded multiple models simultaneously. Panzer III, Panzer IV, Panther, Tiger, Tiger II, each with different engines, transmissions, armor schemes, and maintenance requirements. On paper, this reflected innovation and battlefield adaptation. In practice, it fractured logistics. A unit operating Panthers could not easily be supported by parts meant for Panzer IVs. Recovery vehicles struggled to tow heavier tanks. Trained mechanics were in short supply. A damaged vehicle often became a permanent loss, not because it was destroyed, but because it could not be repaired in time. The same pattern appeared in aviation. Germany introduced some of the most advanced aircraft of the war: jet fighters, rocket interceptors, cutting-edge designs that promised to shatter Allied air superiority. But these aircraft arrived into a system already stretched thin. Fuel shortages limited training. Spare parts were scarce. The pilots transitioned to radically new machines with minimal hours. The breakthrough weapons existed. The systems.
Angle 1. The human angle. Training for brilliance versus training for continuity. At the center of every military system are people: pilots, tank crews, mechanics, infantrymen. And here, the difference between Germany and America was not about courage or intelligence. It was about expectations. German military culture prized excellence at the individual level. Pilots were trained to be elite. Tank commanders were expected to master complex machines. Units relied heavily on experienced veterans whose skill compensated for material shortfalls. This approach produced remarkable results early in the war. Small numbers of highly trained crews achieved outsized effects. But excellence has a weakness. It is slow to replace. As losses mounted, Germany struggled to regenerate the same level of proficiency. Training hours were cut due to fuel shortages. New pilots transitioned directly to frontline units with minimal preparation. Tank crews were assigned to unfamiliar vehicles with little time to adapt. The system assumed that skill would persist even as conditions degraded. America assumed the opposite. American planners expected loss. They expected inexperience. They designed training pipelines to produce competence, not brilliance. Pilots were trained to follow procedures. Crews were trained to operate within systems that minimized reliance on improvisation. If one individual was lost, another could take their place with minimal disruption. This difference shaped combat outcomes over time. German veterans grew increasingly isolated, irreplaceable islands of experience surrounded by undertrained replacements. American units rotated, replenished, and continued functioning even as individuals were lost. The system absorbed shock. The human cost was still immense, but one system planned for it. The other was undone by it. Angle 2. The tactical angle. Decisive blows versus sustained pressure. German tactics were designed to break opponents quickly. Concentration of force, surprise, and speed were meant to shatter resistance before it could organize. This approach demanded momentum. Once momentum stalled, the system struggled. American tactics were designed to grind. They emphasized coordination between arms, methodical advance, and continuous application of pressure. Progress was measured in miles and days, not dramatic breakthroughs. Setbacks were expected and corrected through reinforcement rather than reinvention. In the early war, German decisiveness overwhelmed unprepared opponents. Later, against enemies who could absorb losses and continue fighting, decisive blows became harder to achieve. Sustained pressure, however, compounded. American forces didn't need to win every engagement spectacularly. They needed to keep fighting tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Each engagement reduced German capacity slightly until those reductions became irreversible. This tactical philosophy aligned perfectly with American industrial power and clashed fatally with Germany's reliance on singular successes. Angle 3, the technological angle. Peak performance versus operational reality. German technology often aimed for peak performance: faster aircraft, heavier armor, more powerful guns. These innovations pushed the boundaries of what was possible and often achieved impressive results in controlled conditions. But peak performance comes with cost. Advanced systems require specialized maintenance. They demand high-quality materials. They punish error. Under ideal conditions, they shine. Under stress, they falter. American technology emphasized operational reality. Aircraft were designed to fly in bad weather, from rough airfields, maintained by average crews. Tanks were built to be repaired quickly, even if that meant sacrificing some theoretical advantage. Weapons were standardized to simplify logistics. The result was not technological stagnation, it was technological restraint. America did innovate, but only when innovation could be scaled, supported, and sustained. Germany innovated even when it could not. Over time, this difference mattered more than raw capability. Angle 4, the leadership angle. Betting on the next solution.
German leadership increasingly believed that the next breakthrough would restore balance. Each new weapon was framed as a turning point. Expectations were placed on machines rather than structures. Hope migrated from planning rooms to prototype hangars. This mindset delayed difficult decisions. Simplification was postponed, standardization was resisted. Programs were protected because abandoning them felt like surrender. Leadership became invested in the idea that brilliance could still compensate for decline. American leadership invested elsewhere. They invested in coordination, in logistics, in command structures that emphasized predictability. When programs failed, they were canceled without ceremony. When systems worked, they were expanded relentlessly. This was not cynicism, it was discipline. Leadership on one side chased redemption, on the other, it enforced repetition. Angle 5, the enemy angle, how opponents experience the difference. To those fighting Germany, the early war felt like facing sudden storms, overwhelming, fast, disorienting. Later, it felt like facing diminishing bursts of brilliance separated by long stretches of strain. To those fighting America, the experience was different. There was no single moment of collapse to exploit. Pressure was constant, losses were replaced, defenses rebuilt. The enemy didn't seem to tire. This perception mattered. Morale is shaped not only by victories and defeats, but by what seems possible. Against Germany, enemies learned to survive until momentum faded. Against America, survival didn't promise relief. By 1944, this difference was understood intuitively on the battlefield. Germany could still hurt you, America would still be there tomorrow. That realization didn't come from one battle or one weapon. It emerged gradually, as systems revealed their true strength. And as the war approached its decisive moments, these angles converged, human, tactical, technological, and leadership, into a single, unavoidable truth. Breakthroughs could shock, systems could endure, and endurance was about to decide everything. Angle 6, the industrial angle, factories as weapons. By 1943, factories had become front lines. In Germany, production was increasingly reactive. Bombing forced dispersion, skilled workers were lost, supply chains fractured. Each disruption demanded improvisation, and improvisation multiplied variation. Variation multiplied failure. Even when output numbers looked respectable on paper, the reality inside units was uneven quality and delayed delivery. Production was brilliant in spurts, and brittle in continuity. American industry operated differently. Factories were designed to repeat the same task endlessly. Tooling emphasized speed and interchangeability. Quality control aimed for consistency rather than perfection. If a plant was damaged, others compensated. If a supplier failed, alternatives already existed. This was not merely industrial capacity, it was industrial resilience. The effect reached the battlefield invisibly. A tank knocked out in Normandy could be replaced. An aircraft lost over Germany could be matched the next day. Loss did not translate into pause. Germany's factories chased excellence under bombardment. America's factories produced adequacy without interruption. Over time, adequacy won. Angle 7, the logistical angle, movement without friction. Logistics is often described as unglamorous. In the Second World War, it was decisive. Germany's logistical system was forced to support diversity, different fuel types, different spare parts, different ammunition. Each new breakthrough weapon added strain. Supply officers became interpreters between incompatible systems. As fronts expanded, this strain turned lethal. Trains could not deliver the right parts to the right places in time. Vehicles waited for repairs that never came. Advanced machines sat idle not because they were broken, but because the system could not support them. America built logistics first. Fuel was standardized, ammunition types were simplified, vehicles shared components across classes, ports were expanded, roads were reinforced. Entire armies moved not as collections of units, but as synchronized flows. This reduced friction. An American commander could plan knowing that fuel would arrive, that ammunition would fit, that replacements would integrate quickly. German commanders increasingly planned around what they lacked. This difference reshaped operational freedom. Germany reacted to shortages, America exploited abundance. Angle 8, the replacement angle, fighting after loss. Loss defines war. How a system responds to loss defines victory. German units suffered irreplaceable losses early. Experienced pilots, veteran crews, trained officers. Each loss carried disproportionate weight. Replacements arrived late, untrained, and unfamiliar with complex equipment. The system depended on memory. Memory could not be replaced fast enough. American units were built around turnover. Training centers ran continuously. Doctrine emphasized handover. Units expected personnel changes. Command structures adapted to rotation. Experience was institutionalized rather than personal. When losses occurred, the system continued. This did not mean American units were unaffected by casualties. It meant they were not paralyzed by them. Germany's breakthroughs required experts. America's systems required participants. Over time, participation proved more sustainable. Angle 9, the psychological angle, hope versus certainty. As the war dragged on, German morale became tied to announcements. New weapons were unveiled, promises were made, expectations were raised. Each breakthrough carried emotional weight far beyond its practical impact. When results failed to match hope, disappointment deepened. Hope became volatile. American morale rested elsewhere. Confidence grew not from promises, but from repetition. Convoys arrived, units rotated, equipment worked. The war felt endless, but manageable. Certainty replaced hope. This difference affected behavior. German soldiers waited for change. American soldiers expected continuity. One mindset looks forward, the other endures. Endurance mattered more. Angle 10, the strategic angle, choosing the war you can fight. Ultimately, Germany and America were not fighting the same war. Germany fought a war of necessity, one that demanded rapid resolution. When that resolution failed, the strategy collapsed inward. Each new breakthrough was an attempt to escape time itself. America fought a war of capacity. It assumed time would pass. It assumed losses would occur. It assumed friction. And it built structures that could function anyway. This was not foresight alone. It was alignment between goals and means. Germany chased outcomes it could no longer sustain. America sustained effort until outcomes arrived. By late 1944, this difference was visible everywhere. German forces still possessed moments of brilliance. American forces possessed momentum. Momentum does not require miracles. It requires continuation. And as the war reached its decisive phase, continuation, not innovation, would determine who can still fight when the final choices arrived. Those choices would not be abstract. They would unfold in specific places, on specific dates, where systems would either absorb pressure or finally break under it.
June 6, 1944. Normandy. The invasion does not begin with a breakthrough weapon. It begins with repetition. Landing craft surge toward the beaches in waves that seem endless. Aircraft circle overhead in disciplined patterns. Paratroopers drop across wide areas, not expecting perfection, but accepting dispersion. The plan does not rely on one decisive blow. It relies on the assumption that some things will fail and that the system will compensate. This moment exposes the difference between Germany and America more clearly than any prototype ever could. For Germany, the invasion represents a crisis demanding an answer. Commanders look for the tool that can stop it. Panzer divisions are held back for the decisive counterstroke. Advanced weapons are discussed. The hope is that one concentrated response can reverse the situation before it spreads. For America and its allies, the invasion is designed to spread. If one beach falters, another advances. If one unit stalls, another pushes through. Losses are absorbed, not denied. The system expects resistance and plans around it. This is not brilliance. It is architecture. As the fighting intensifies, Germany introduces its best available solutions. Elite units are committed. Heavy tanks arrive. Tactical skill produces local successes. American formations are hit hard in places. Casualties mount. But nothing collapses. German breakthroughs remain contained. A village retaken, a road blocked, a counterattack blunted. Each action costs resources Germany cannot easily replace. Each delay buys time for Allied reinforcement. This pattern repeats. Germany still fights with skill, but skill now operates inside a shrinking framework. Fuel shortages limit movement. Allied air power restricts daylight travel. Repairs take longer. Losses linger. America's response is mechanical. More men arrive. More vehicles roll forward. Supply depots expand inland. Airfields are constructed rapidly. The system accelerates as resistance stiffens. By late June, the reality becomes unavoidable. Germany cannot concentrate force without exposing itself elsewhere. Every attempt to achieve a decisive counterstroke is diluted by the need to defend multiple points simultaneously. Breakthrough thinking collides with system pressure. The same dynamic appears in the air. German jet fighters and advanced interceptors begin to appear in small numbers. Their performance is impressive. Their impact is limited. Allied bombers continue flying. Losses are accepted, analyzed, and replaced. Tactics evolve. Escort coverage increases. The system adapts faster than innovation can mature. On the Eastern Front, the pattern mirrors Normandy. German forces deliver sharp tactical responses, but Soviet and Allied production overwhelms them. Each German success requires effort that cannot be sustained. Each Allied loss is a data point, not a disaster. By the summer of 1944, the war has crossed a threshold. Germany is no longer fighting for advantage. It is fighting to contain inevitability. The pursuit of breakthroughs now carries a different weight. New weapons are no longer tools of victory. They are symbols, signals that something dramatic must still be possible. America does not look for drama. It looks for throughput. Factories increase output. Training pipelines expand. Command structures refine coordination. The war becomes a process, not a gamble. This is the turning point, not because Germany stops fighting effectively, but because effectiveness is no longer enough. The war now rewards the side that can repeat effort without degradation. Germany cannot. The pressure builds slowly, relentlessly, town by town, airfield by airfield, convoy by convoy. The system advances, absorbs resistance, and advances again.
By late June, the reality becomes unavoidable. Germany cannot concentrate force without exposing itself elsewhere. Every attempt to achieve a decisive counterstroke is diluted by the need to defend multiple points simultaneously. Breakthrough thinking collides with system pressure. The same dynamic appears in the air. German jet fighters and advanced interceptors begin to appear in small numbers. Their performance is impressive. Their impact is limited. Allied bombers continue flying. Losses are accepted, analyzed, and replaced. Tactics evolve. Escort coverage increases. The system adapts faster than innovation can mature. On the Eastern Front, the pattern mirrors Normandy. German forces deliver sharp tactical responses, but Soviet and Allied production overwhelms them. Each German success requires effort that cannot be sustained. Each Allied loss is a data point, not a disaster. By the summer of 1944, the war has crossed a threshold. Germany is no longer fighting for advantage. It is fighting to contain inevitability. The pursuit of breakthroughs now carries a different weight. New weapons are no longer tools of victory. They are symbols, signals that something dramatic must still be possible. America does not look for drama. It looks for throughput. Factories increase output. Training pipelines expand. Command structures refine coordination. The war becomes a process, not a gamble. This is the turning point, not because Germany stops fighting effectively, but because effectiveness is no longer enough. The war now rewards the side that can repeat effort without degradation. Germany cannot. The pressure builds slowly, relentlessly, town by town, airfield by airfield, convoy by convoy. The system advances, absorbs resistance, and advances again. By autumn 1944, the question is no longer whether Germany can produce another breakthrough. It is whether any breakthrough can still matter. That question will be answered decisively when Germany commits its last reserves, not to build systems, but to chase one final reversal. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes. Germany's final major offensive in the west begins before dawn, under cloud and snow. Artillery opens fire. Infantry moves through forests thought impassable. Armored columns push forward with urgency born of scarcity. This is not a battle designed to grind. It is designed to shock. It is the last expression of Germany's faith in breakthrough. The plan is audacious. A sudden strike through the Ardennes will split Allied lines, seize key crossings, and force a negotiated peace. Speed must compensate for weakness. Supply must substitute for supply. If momentum can be achieved quickly enough, the system pressing Germany from all sides might fracture. For a brief moment, it appears possible. American units are surprised. Communications falter. Towns change hands. Weather grounds Allied aircraft. German armor advances deeper than many expected. On maps, the front bulges westward. Hope flickers. But the conditions that allow the breakthrough also reveal its limits. German units push forward on narrow roads, consuming fuel they cannot replace. Vehicles break down and are abandoned. Infantry marches faster than logistics can follow. Each mile gained stretches the system further. The offensive depends not on sustaining success, but on finishing before reality intervenes. America responds without searching for a countermiracle. It responds with structure. Units are redirected, reserves are committed, airfields reopen as weather clears, supply routes adjust, commanders accept temporary losses in exchange for time. The goal is not to eliminate the bulge immediately, but to contain it. This is the difference made visible. German forces require uninterrupted momentum. Any delay is fatal. American forces require continuity. Delay is tolerable. As days pass, the breakthrough slows. Fuel shortages halt armored spearheads' sort of objectives. Traffic jams clog forest roads. Allied air power returns, turning movement into exposure. The German offensive begins to consume itself. American systems absorb the shock. Units rotate into the line. Artillery concentrations increase. Logistics catch up. The initial surprise fades, replaced by pressure applied from multiple directions. The bulge narrows not through a single decisive action, but through accumulation. By January 1945, the outcome is clear. Germany has expended its last operational reserves, chasing a reversal that could not be sustained. Losses in men, armor, and fuel cannot be replaced. The offensive achieves tactical surprise, but strategic exhaustion. The war does not change direction, it accelerates toward conclusion. This moment seals the argument between breakthroughs and systems. Germany's final gamble demonstrates everything its approach can still do, and everything it can no longer achieve. Innovation, courage, and tactical skill remain present. What is absent is the capacity to repeat effort after effort. America's response is unremarkable and decisive. There is no new weapon unveiled, no dramatic announcement. The system tightens, adjusts, and advances. Losses are replaced, pressure resumes. The Eastern Front collapses in parallel. German forces face overwhelming material superiority applied continuously. Attempts to stabilize the line fail not for lack of bravery, but for lack of depth. By early 1945, Germany's war effort is defined by reaction. Every breakthrough attempt now consumes resources faster than it delivers results. Every delay compounds disadvantage. The system has inverted. Effort produces decline. America's war effort, by contrast, has become self-sustaining. Factories continue output, training continues, logistics flow. The machine no longer depends on exceptional performance. It depends on continuation. The turning point is complete. From this moment on, the war's end is not a question of invention, but of time. Germany has run out of ways to change the equation. America has built an equation that advances regardless of resistance. What follows will not be dramatic innovation or sudden collapse. It will be consequence, measured, relentless, final. By early 1945, the conflict no longer revolved around strategy or surprise. It revolved around capacity. Germany's armed forces were still fighting. Units still held ground. Pilots still took off. Engineers still refined designs. But these actions existed inside a narrowing framework, one defined not by what was possible, but by what could still be sustained. The war had shifted from contest to conclusion. This shift was visible everywhere. On the ground, German formations were increasingly hollow. Divisions existed on paper with names and histories, but their strength varied wildly. Equipment was scarce, fuel was rationed, ammunition allocations were calculated cautiously. Movement itself became a risk, as Allied air power punished anything that tried to shift position in daylight. Orders still arrived, the ability to execute them did not. Germany's system had reached a point where effort no longer translated into effect. A counterattack might delay an advance by hours or days, but it could not change direction. Each action consumed resources that could not be replaced. Every kilometer lost became permanent. The United States and its allies experienced the war differently. Losses were still heavy, fighting was still brutal, but there was no sense of collapse inside the system. Units rotated, rearmed, and returned. Bridges.
When the fighting finally stopped in May 1945, silence spread unevenly across Europe. Some cities were rubble. Some factories still stood. Some armies dissolved overnight. Others simply halted where they were. But beneath the physical aftermath lay a deeper reckoning, one about how the war had been fought and why it had ended the way it did. For Germany, defeat arrived not as a single realization, but as a gradual unraveling. The nation had fielded some of the most advanced weapons ever conceived. Jet aircraft flew before their time. Missiles crossed borders without pilots. Tanks dominated battlefields when conditions allowed. Yet none of these achievements translated into survival. Post-war assessments inside Germany reached a quiet consensus. The problem had never been intelligence or creativity. It had been structure. Germany's war effort had been shaped by urgency from the beginning. It required rapid success. When that success failed to arrive, urgency turned into dependence on innovation, on exception, on the belief that something new could always compensate for something lost. Over time, this belief hardened into policy. The result was fragmentation. Production lines multiplied instead of consolidating. Training shortened instead of expanding. Logistics became reactive rather than anticipatory. Each breakthrough added complexity to a system already strained. In peace, this complexity looked impressive. In war, it proved fatal. The United States emerged from the war with a different legacy. America did not win because it produced a single decisive weapon. It won because it produced continuity. Its factories ran without pause. Its training pipelines never closed. Its logistics adapted faster than enemies could disrupt them. Its doctrine assumed failure and planned around it. This shaped the post-war world profoundly. In the immediate aftermath, American military planners did not celebrate their systems as triumphs. They analyzed them as baselines. What worked was institutionalized. What failed was quietly corrected. The goal was not to preserve wartime methods, but to understand why they had succeeded. Germany, by contrast, faced the task of rebuilding from absence. Its industrial base was shattered, its military dissolved, its doctrine discredited. Yet the lessons of the war were absorbed deeply. Post-war German thinking emphasized integration over innovation, reliability over brilliance, and systems over spectacle. The memory of chasing breakthroughs and losing everything lingered. These lessons extended beyond Germany. Across the world, militaries studied the war's outcome not through individual battles, but through patterns. Nations noted that victory favored those who could replace losses faster than they incurred them, that standardized equipment outperformed specialized brilliance under prolonged strain, that logistics determined tempo more reliably than tactics. The war had redefined power, not as peak capability, but as sustained effort. America's post-war position reflected this understanding. Its military-industrial base did not demobilize entirely, it transitioned. Factories shifted to peacetime output without losing capacity. Training institutions evolved rather than disbanded. Alliances were structured around interoperability and supply, not just shared ideology. Germany's breakthroughs, once symbols of technological daring, became historical footnotes, admired, studied, but understood as insufficient. They represented what could be achieved, not what could be maintained. This distinction shaped memory. In popular imagination, Germany's late war weapons often loom large. They appear futuristic, dramatic, almost tragic in their promise. America's systems are harder to romanticize. They hum, they repeat, they endure. But history favors endurance. The war ended not because Germany lacked ideas, but because ideas alone could not carry weight without structure. America's approach, building systems that could absorb loss and continue functioning, proved decisive not just in 1945, but in the decades that followed. As Europe rebuilt, this lesson influenced everything from military alliances to economic recovery. Systems mattered, coordination mattered, repetition mattered. The war had not been decided by genius or desperation, it had been decided by design. And as the world moved forward, the contrast between chasing breakthroughs and building systems remained a quiet guide, one written not in slogans or monuments, but in the steady functioning of institutions shaped by the hardest lessons of the 20th century. That understanding settles the final chapter, not in triumph or bitterness, but in reflection, on what the war ultimately revealed about power, persistence, and the cost of mistaking brilliance for durability. The Second World War did not end with a single invention proving decisive. It ended with one approach to power exhausting itself and another continuing almost without pause. Germany entered the war believing that speed, ingenuity, and bold technological leaps could compensate for limited time and resources. For a while, that belief seemed justified. Breakthroughs delivered shock, innovation delivered advantage, but each success increased dependence on the next one. When the war expanded beyond Germany's capacity to control tempo, breakthroughs became necessities rather than options, and necessity is a fragile foundation. America never expected a single moment to save it. It assumed war would be inefficient, wasteful, and prolonged. It planned for average performance, not exceptional brilliance. It accepted loss as inevitable and designed structures that could absorb it. Training replaced heroism with procedure. Logistics replaced improvisation with flow. Production replaced inspiration with repetition. This difference was not dramatic in the moment. It revealed itself slowly. Germany's weapons often arrived ahead of their time, but behind their support. America's weapons were rarely perfect, but they arrived with everything needed to keep them fighting. One side chased advantage, the other built continuity. History chose continuity. The war demonstrated that power in modern conflict is not defined by what can be achieved once, but by what can be sustained under pressure. Systems that tolerate failure endure longer than brilliance that demands perfection. Organization outlasts inspiration. Repetition outlasts surprise. Germany's breakthroughs remain impressive. They still command attention, but they also serve as warnings, examples of how innovation, when disconnected from structure, becomes weight rather than leverage. America's systems are less visible in memory, but more influential in outcome. They shaped not only victory, but the post-war world that followed, one built around institutions, logistics, alliances, and sustained capacity rather than sudden transformation. The war was not won by the future arriving early, it was won by the present being maintained relentlessly. And in that quiet distinction, between chasing breakthroughs and building systems, lies one of the clearest lessons the Second World War left behind.